The glass shattered on the floor of Whiskey Moon, a sound Willow Andersen had become far too familiar with over the years. She didn't flinch as she grabbed a broom, swiftly sweeping up the remains of what had been a perfectly good highball glass only moments before. As the owner of the most popular cocktail bar in downtown Portland, she'd learned to take such mishaps in stride. But tonight, something felt different. Perhaps it was the weight of the decision she'd made earlier that day to finally teach her first mixology class tomorrow at the local community center. Or maybe it was simply that she was growing tired of the same routine, night after night, watching people find connection at her bar while she remained behind it, safely distant from anything resembling vulnerability. "Sorry about that," called her bartender Ryan as he juggled 3 martini glasses. "Friday night crowd is wild tonight." "No worries," Willow replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just add it to the tally of glasses we've sacrificed to the cocktail gods." Willow had built Whiskey Moon from nothing 5 years ago, transforming a dilapidated warehouse space into the industrial chic hotspot that now had lines around the block every weekend. Her innovative cocktails had earned her features in local magazines and a loyal following, but lately, she'd been feeling restless. Teaching seemed like the perfect solution, a way to share her passion while potentially meeting new people. As she finished clearing the glass, Willow glanced at her watch. Midnight. 6 more hours until closing and then just a few hours of sleep before her first class. She took a deep breath, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Across town, in the penthouse suite of the Monroe building, Quentin Xiong stared at his laptop screen, the glow illuminating his frustrated expression. As CEO of Cascade Technologies, one of the fastest-growing green energy companies in the Pacific Northwest, he was accustomed to solving complex problems. But right now, the invitation on his screen seemed more daunting than any business challenge he'd faced. "Join us for Bernard and Helena's wedding celebration," the invitation read. Below it was a personal note from Bernard. "Bring someone special this time, Q. It's been 2 years since Vanessa. Time to move on." Quentin closed his laptop with more force than necessary. His college roommate and best friend was getting married in 3 weeks, and once again, he'd be attending solo. It wasn't for lack of opportunities. Being young, successful, and according to Portland Monthly's most eligible bachelor's issue, reasonably attractive but rather a lack of time and interest in the dating scene. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Don't forget your 10 a.m. tomorrow. Mixology class at Portland Community Center. Team building exercise prep for the company retreat." Quentin groaned. Right. He'd agreed to take this class to evaluate whether it would be a good activity for the upcoming company retreat. Something about fostering creativity and communication in a relaxed setting. He'd much rather spend his Saturday morning reviewing quarterly projections, but his HR director had been insistent. He set his alarm and tried to push away thoughts of weddings, loneliness, and the endless stream of business responsibilities that consumed his life. Maybe learning to mix a decent cocktail wouldn't be the worst way to spend a morning. The community center classroom had been transformed when Willow arrived at 9 a.m. Instead of the sterile space she'd seen during her walk through, the room now featured 6 small bar stations, each equipped with the basic tools and ingredients she'd requested. Sunlight streamed through large windows, casting a warm glow over the wooden workspaces. The facilities manager had even added some potted plants in the corners, giving the space an unexpectedly inviting atmosphere. Willow arranged her notes on the main demonstration table and checked her supplies one last time. 10 students had signed up, a perfect number for her first class. She'd spent weeks developing a curriculum that would be approachable yet comprehensive, starting with classic cocktails before moving into more creative territory. By 9:55, most of her students had arrived, an eclectic mix of 20-somethings looking to improve their home entertaining skills, a middle-aged couple celebrating an anniversary, and a group of friends who'd clearly decided this was a fun alternative to their usual weekend brunch. Willow welcomed them warmly, feeling her initial nervousness begin to fade as she chatted with each person. At precisely 10 a.m., she was about to begin when the door swung open and a latecomer entered. Willow's greeting died on her lips as she took in the tall figure now standing somewhat awkwardly at the back of the room. He wore a simple black Henley and dark jeans that looked expensive despite their casual style. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and he carried himself with the unmistakable confidence of someone used to commanding attention. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice deeper than she'd expected. "Traffic was terrible on the bridge." "No problem at all," Willow recovered quickly, gesturing to the only empty station. "We were just about to start. I'm Willow Andersen, your instructor." "Quentin Xiong," he replied with a polite nod, moving to take his place. He didn't offer any further explanation or small talk, instead focusing on organizing the tools at his station with methodical precision. Willow cleared her throat and addressed the class. "Welcome to Cocktail Fundamentals. Over the next 4 Saturdays, we'll explore the art and science of mixology, from the classics to contemporary creations. Today, we'll start with the building blocks, understanding spirits, balancing flavors, and mastering basic techniques." As she began her introduction to the primary spirits that formed the foundation of most cocktails, Willow couldn't help but notice Quentin Xiong's intense focus. Unlike some of the other students who were chatting or taking casual notes, he seemed to approach the lesson with the seriousness of someone studying for a critical exam. His brow furrowed slightly as he examined each bottle she presented, and he jotted notes in a small leather-bound notebook. When they moved to the practical portion, a simple whiskey sour Willow circulated among the stations, offering guidance. She saved Quentin's station for last, curious about the serious student who seemed so out of place among the more casual attendees. "How are you doing with your measurements?" she asked, approaching his workspace. Quentin looked up, and for the first time Willow noticed his eyes dark and intelligent, with unexpected flecks of amber. "I think I'm getting it," he said, "though I'm realizing there's more intuition involved than I expected." "That's exactly right," Willow said, surprised by his insight. "There are rules and ratios, but great mixology also requires feeling and adaptation." She watched as he measured the whiskey with complete concentration. "You have good form with the jigger. Have you done this before?" "No," he replied with the hint of a smile, "but I'm good at following instructions. It's the creative part I'm concerned about." "We'll get there," Willow assured him. "For now, just focus on the fundamentals." She moved away but found herself glancing back at him throughout the class. There was something compelling about his intensity, the way he approached each task with such focus. When the students tasted their creations at the end of the session, she noticed how he analyzed each sip methodically, as if mentally cataloging the flavors. As the class ended and students began to file out, several lingered to ask questions or compliment her teaching. Willow answered each enthusiastically, pleased with how the first session had gone. She was surprised when she looked up to find Quentin still at his station, carefully wiping down the surface. "You don't have to clean up," she said, approaching him. "That's included in the class fee." "Force of habit," he replied, folding the towel neatly. "I don't like leaving messes for others." Willow found herself curious about this enigmatic student. "So what brought you to a mixology class on a Saturday morning?" Quentin hesitated before answering. "Research, actually. I'm considering it for a team-building activity." "Oh, what kind of team?" "My company," he said without elaboration. "I should get going. Thank you for the lesson." He gathered his notebook and headed for the door, then paused. "The whiskey sour was excellent, by the way. I've never made anything more complicated than opening a beer." With that, he was gone, leaving Willow to wonder about the mysterious man who approached cocktail making like a science and cleaned up after himself in a community center class. Quentin sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine, reviewing his notes from the class. The instructor, Willow, had been unexpectedly knowledgeable. He'd assumed the class might be somewhat superficial, but her explanations of flavor profiles and the chemistry behind certain techniques had been impressively thorough. He'd also noticed, despite his focus on the material, that she had striking eyes, a clear blue-green that reminded him of glacial lakes he'd seen on a hiking trip in Alaska. And when she demonstrated the proper shaking technique, her confidence had been, well, attractive. Quentin shook his head, dismissing the thought. He wasn't here to admire the instructor. He needed to determine if this activity would work for 50 employees from different departments who barely interacted outside of meetings. Based on today's experience, it had potential. The practical, hands-on nature of mixology seemed ideal for breaking down barriers while teaching a useful skill. He started the car and headed toward the office. Weekend work was his norm, the price of building Cascade Technologies from a small startup to a company with over 200 employees in just 6 years. The quiet of Saturday mornings was perfect for strategic planning without constant interruptions. As he drove, his mind kept returning to the way Willow had explained the balance of sweet and sour elements, her hands moving expressively as she spoke. There had been something passionate yet precise about her teaching style that resonated with him. "Focus, Xiong," he muttered to himself. "She's just the instructor for a class you're evaluating." But as he arrived at his office building, he found himself looking forward to next Saturday's session more than he would have expected. The following week, Willow arrived at the community center early again, this time bringing some additional ingredients she thought might spark her students' creativity. After the success of the first class, she felt more confident, even excited about today's lesson on infusions and syrups. As she arranged her materials, she found herself wondering if Quentin Xiong would return. Something about his serious demeanor and thoughtful questions had stayed with her throughout the week. Several times while creating new cocktails for Whiskey Moon's spring menu, she'd found herself considering what he might think of the combinations. Students began to arrive, greeting her warmly. The middle-aged couple brought her homemade cookies as a thank you for the whiskey sour recipe, which they said had been a hit at their dinner party. Willow was chatting with them when she noticed Quentin enter, this time 5 minutes early. He nodded a greeting to her from across the room and took his place at the same station as before. Today's class focused on creating homemade ingredients that could elevate ordinary cocktails into extraordinary ones. Willow demonstrated techniques for infusing spirits with various flavors and creating simple syrups with unexpected ingredients. "The key is balance," she explained as she passed around samples of a basil-infused gin. "You want the flavor to complement the spirit, not overpower it. Think of it as a conversation rather than a monologue." She noticed Quentin taking detailed notes, his expression thoughtful. When they moved to the hands-on portion, creating a rosemary-infused simple syrup and using it in a gin fizz variation, she found herself at his station again. "How's it going?" she asked, observing his careful measuring of sugar and water. "Better than expected," he replied. "Though I'm wondering about the commercial applications of house-made ingredients like these. The time investment seems significant." Willow smiled, intrigued by his practical question. "It is, but the return is worth it. At my bar, our house infusions and syrups are what set us apart. Customers can taste the difference between something mass-produced and something crafted with intention." "You own a bar." Quentin looked up from his simmering syrup, genuine interest in his eyes. "Whiskey Moon downtown," she said with a hint of pride. "We've been open 5 years now." Recognition flickered across his face. "I've heard of it. Innovative cocktails, industrial design, there's always a line." "That's us," Willow confirmed, pleased that he knew of her place. "You should stop by sometime. First drink would be on the house." The words left her mouth before she could consider their implications. Was she flirting with a student? That hadn't been her intention when she decided to teach these classes. "I might take you up on that," Quentin said, his expression giving nothing away. "Once I've completed this course and can appreciate what I'm drinking properly." "Fair enough," she replied with a smile, moving on to help another student whose syrup was threatening to boil over. Throughout the remainder of the class, Willow maintained her professional demeanor, but she couldn't help noticing small details about Quentin, the way his brow furrowed in concentration as he muddled herbs, how he seemed to relax slightly when his creation turned out well, the elegant efficiency of his movements as he worked. For someone who claimed to have little experience with cocktails, he had surprisingly good instincts. At the end of class, as students were gathering their belongings, Quentin approached her demonstration table. "I had a question about next week's lesson, if you have a moment," he said. "Of course," Willow replied, clearing away some glassware. "You mentioned we'll be covering classic cocktails with modern twists. I was wondering if you could recommend any reading to prepare. I find I learn better when I have some background knowledge." Willow was surprised by his request. None of her other students had asked for homework. "There are several good books on cocktail history. I can email you a list if you'd like." "I'd appreciate that," he said, handing her his business card. Willow glanced down at the card and nearly dropped it when she read, "Quentin Xiong, Chief Executive Officer, Cascade Technologies." She looked up at him with new understanding. "So when you said your company, you meant?" "Yes," he confirmed with a slight shrug. "We're planning a retreat next month, and I'm evaluating activities." "As I mentioned." Willow nodded, trying to reconcile this new information with the serious student she'd been teaching. Cascade Technologies was no small operation. She'd read about their innovative work in renewable energy in the business section of the Portland Tribune. "I'll send those recommendations tonight," she said, slipping the card into her pocket. "And I'll be sure to make next week's lesson especially comprehensive." "The current curriculum is excellent," Quentin assured her. "I've learned more than I expected." He hesitated, then added, "Your teaching style is engaging. You clearly know your subject matter intimately." The compliment, delivered in his straightforward manner, pleased Willow more than it probably should have. "Thank you. I've been passionate about mixology for a long time." After he left, Willow found herself staring at his business card, running her thumb over the embossed logo. A CEO taking a community center class on cocktails was unexpected enough, but the fact that he was so committed to learning the material properly, even requesting additional resources, was even more intriguing. That evening, after finishing her shift at Whiskey Moon, Willow composed an email to Quentin with a carefully curated list of books and articles about cocktail history and technique. She kept the message professional, but found herself spending more time on it than was strictly necessary. revising her wording several times before finally hitting send. Quentin was working late in his office when the email arrived. He'd spent the day in meetings with potential investors, making the case for Cascade's newest solar technology. The negotiations had been exhausting, and he'd been about to head home when the notification appeared on his screen. The subject line read simply, "Cocktail Reading Recommendations." He opened it immediately, surprised by the comprehensive list Willow had provided, complete with brief annotations about each resource. It was clear she'd put thought into her selections rather than sending a generic list. He found himself smiling at her closing line. "If you only have time for one, start with Imbibe by David Wondrich. It's the mixology equivalent of a CEO's strategic vision. It shows not just how to make drinks, but why they matter in the first place." Without overthinking it, Quentin opened Amazon and ordered the book with overnight delivery. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he replied to her email. "Thank you for these recommendations. I've ordered Wondrich's book and look forward to discussing it next week. I appreciate you taking the time to compile such a thorough list." He paused, then added, "Also, I've heard that Whiskey Moon creates seasonal menus. As someone new to appreciating craft cocktails, I'm curious about your creative process. Perhaps you could incorporate that into one of our remaining sessions." After sending the email, Quentin realized it was the first non-work-related correspondence he'd initiated in months. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd asked about her creative process, except that he was genuinely curious about how someone translated passion into a successful business. Across town, Willow was closing up the bar when her phone chimed with Quentin's response. She read it twice, surprised by his interest in her creative process. Most people only cared about the final product, the delicious drink in their glass, not the journey that led to its creation. She typed a quick reply. "Happy to discuss the creative process behind our menus. It's actually perfect timing for our final class, when we'll be designing original cocktails. See you Saturday." As she locked the front door of Whiskey Moon, Willow couldn't help but wonder what Quentin Xiong, CEO, might think of her humble bar if he ever did visit. The thought was both intriguing and slightly unnerving. The third Saturday arrived with unseasonably warm weather. Willow decided to incorporate some refreshing spring cocktails into the day's lesson on classics with modern twists. She arrived early as usual, but was surprised to find Quentin already there, reading at his station. "You're early," she observed, setting down her supply bag. He looked up from his book, which she recognized as Wondrich's Imbibe, and offered a slight smile. "I had some reading to finish before class." "And what did you think?" Willow asked, genuinely curious about his impression of the cocktail history book she'd recommended. "Fascinating," Quentin replied, closing the book. "I hadn't considered how deeply cocktails are woven into American cultural history. The evolution from medicinal purposes to social rituals is particularly interesting." "It's one of my favorite aspects of mixology," Willow agreed, pleased by his thoughtful response. "Every drink tells a story about its time, place, and the people who created it. Is that part of your process at Whiskey Moon, finding the story behind the drink?" "Exactly," she nodded, impressed by his insight. "Each cocktail on our menu has a narrative, sometimes historical, sometimes personal. It gives the experience more dimension." They might have continued the conversation, but other students began arriving, and Willow shifted into teacher mode. Today's class focused on taking classics like the old-fashioned, Negroni, and Manhattan and giving them contemporary updates. "The key to a successful twist," she explained as she demonstrated a variation on a Manhattan using Oregon cherry liqueur. is respecting the original while bringing something new to the experience. You want evolution, not revolution. When the students began working on their own variations, Willow noticed Quentin referencing not just her handouts, but also notes he'd apparently taken from his reading. His approach to creating a spiced old-fashioned was methodical but creative, incorporating elements they'd learned in previous sessions. "That's an interesting combination," she commented, observing his use of star anise and cardamom. "What inspired it?" "My grandmother's tea," he replied, somewhat unexpectedly. "She used to make this spiced black tea every winter. The aromatics reminded me of whiskey's natural characteristics." Willow was touched by the personal connection. It was the first glimpse of something beyond Quentin's professional exterior. "Personal associations make for the most meaningful creations," she told him. "I'd love to try it when you're finished." His finished cocktail was remarkably balanced for a beginner. The spices complemented the whiskey without overwhelming it, and he'd added just enough sweetness to round out the flavors. When Willow tasted it, she couldn't hide her impressed expression. "This is excellent," she told him honestly. "You have a natural talent for flavor combinations." For the first time, she saw a genuine smile transform his usually serious face. The change was remarkable suddenly. He looked younger and more approachable, with a warmth in his eyes that she hadn't noticed before. "High praise from a professional," he said. "Thank you." At the end of class, as students were leaving, Quentin lingered again. "I was wondering," he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "That is, I think mixology would be perfect for our company retreat. But I'd like to discuss the logistics further. Would you be available for a consultation? Professionally, of course." Willow considered his request. She occasionally did private events and consultations, though usually through Whiskey Moon rather than her personal time. "I could do that," she agreed. "Why don't you come by the bar on Monday evening? It's our slowest night, so we could talk without too many interruptions." "Monday works," Quentin nodded. "What time?" 7. We open at 5, but it's usually quiet until later. 7 it is." "Thank you for considering it." As he left, Willow wondered if she'd made a mistake mixing business with whatever this was. Not pleasure exactly, but something that felt less than strictly professional. There was an undeniable connection forming between them, even if it was just mutual respect for each other's expertise. Monday evening at Whiskey Moon was indeed quiet when Quentin arrived precisely at 7. The bar's design impressed him. Immediately exposed brick walls contrasted with sleek metallic fixtures, while the bar itself was a magnificent piece of reclaimed timber that ran the length of the room. Edison bulbs in various shapes hung at different heights, creating pools of warm light throughout the space. He spotted Willow behind the bar, talking with a bartender. She looked different here, more in her element, dressed in a simple black button-down with the sleeves rolled up, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a loose braid. When she noticed him, she smiled and waved him over. "Welcome to Whiskey Moon," she said as he approached. "What do you think?" "It's impressive," Quentin replied honestly, taking a seat at the bar. "The design is sophisticated without being pretentious. I can see why it's popular." "Thank you. It took months to get the atmosphere exactly right." She gestured to the menu in front of him. "Would you like something to drink before we discuss business?" Quentin studied the menu, intrigued by the creative cocktail descriptions. Each one included not just ingredients but a brief story or inspiration. "I'll try the Portland Pioneer," he decided, drawn to the description. "A tribute to our city's innovative spirit rye whiskey, local hazelnut liqueur, house bitters, and a hint of Douglas fir. Bold yet approachable, like the best Portland endeavors." Willow nodded approvingly. "One of my favorites." She began preparing the drink with practiced efficiency, her movements fluid and precise. "So, tell me about this retreat you're planning." 3 days at Mount Hood Lodge next month, Quentin explained. 50 employees from all departments. We've grown quickly, and there are people who have never interacted outside of emails. I want to build connections across team boundaries. Willow placed the finished cocktail in front of him, an amber liquid garnished with a twist of orange peel and a sprig of something that must be Douglas fir. "And you think cocktails might help with that?" Quentin took a sip, impressed by the complex flavors that somehow worked in perfect harmony. "This is excellent," he said before answering her question. "And yes, I do. In your classes, I've noticed how the process naturally encourages collaboration and conversation. It's hands-on, creative, and has a tangible outcome. Plus, everyone enjoys a good drink." "All true," Willow agreed. "I've done corporate events before, though nothing quite this size. We could set up multiple stations, each focusing on a different type of cocktail. Teams would rotate through, learning techniques and creating their own versions." As they discussed the logistics, Quentin found himself increasingly comfortable. Willow was as knowledgeable about the business aspects as she was about mixology itself. She asked thoughtful questions about his goals for the retreat and offered suggestions that aligned perfectly with what he was trying to achieve. "What about dietary restrictions and non-drinkers?" she asked. "We should have alternatives planned." "Good point," Quentin acknowledged, impressed by her thoroughness. "About 15% of our staff don't drink alcohol for various reasons." "Not a problem. We can create equally complex and interesting non-alcoholic options." The same principles of balance and flavor apply. As they continued talking, the bar began to fill with what appeared to be regulars. Willow occasionally greeted someone or answered a quick question from her staff, but remained primarily focused on their conversation. When they'd outlined a solid plan for the retreat, Willow refilled Quentin's water glass and asked, "So, what made you start Cascade Technologies, if you don't mind my asking?" The question caught him slightly off guard. Most business discussions didn't venture into personal territory, but he found himself wanting to answer honestly. "My father was an environmental scientist," he explained. "He spent his career documenting the effects of climate change and industrial pollution. He died of lung cancer when I was in college, likely exacerbated by the years he spent collecting samples in contaminated areas." "I'm sorry," Willow said quietly. "Thank you." "After he died, I changed my focus from general business to sustainable energy. I wanted to build something that would help create the cleaner world he'd fought for." Quentin rarely shared this story, but something about Willow's genuine interest made it feel natural. "What about you? How did you end up owning a cocktail bar?" Willow smiled, gesturing around them. "It wasn't the original plan. I was actually studying biochemistry when I took a bartending job to pay tuition. Something about the precision combined with creativity just clicked for me. By my senior year, I was creating original cocktails and entering competitions." "So you never finished your degree?" Quentin asked, curious about her path. "Oh, I finished. But by then, I was already passionate about mixology. I worked at several high-end bars, learning the business side, before opening this place 5 years ago." She shrugged. "My parents were initially disappointed that I wasn't using my science background until I explained that mixology is essentially applied chemistry with a dash of psychology." "And art," Quentin added, raising his glass. "This cocktail is evidence of that." Their conversation continued, moving easily between professional topics and more personal ones. Quentin found himself sharing stories about the early days of Cascade Technologies, that he rarely discussed the setbacks and near failures, along with the successes. Willow told him about the challenges of being a female bar owner in a still sometimes male-dominated industry. Before either of them realized it, 2 hours had passed. The bar had grown busier, and Willow's staff had been handling things smoothly, but Quentin noticed her occasionally glancing at the mounting activity. "I should let you get back to work," he said, reluctantly checking his watch. "I didn't mean to take up your entire evening." "It's fine," Willow assured him. "Ryan and Jess have it under control." Nevertheless, she stood and reached for the contract she'd drafted for the retreat. "Here's the proposal we discussed. Look it over and let me know if you want any changes." Quentin accepted the document. "I'm sure it's perfect. I'll have my assistant send over the deposit tomorrow." He hesitated, then added, "I've enjoyed this conversation beyond just the business aspects." "So have I," Willow admitted, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "It's refreshing to talk with someone who understands both the creative and business sides of things." As Quentin paid for his drink, insisting despite her offer to comp it, he found himself reluctant to leave. "I'll see you Saturday for the final class," he said. "Looking forward to it," Willow replied with a smile that stayed with him long after he'd left the bar. The final mixology class arrived faster than Willow had anticipated. She'd spent the week finalizing plans for Cascade Technologies' retreat, which had been officially confirmed with a generous deposit. She'd also found herself thinking about Quentin far more often than was professionally appropriate, replaying their conversation at the bar, remembering the way his eyes had lit up when discussing his company's mission. Today's class would focus on creating original cocktails, putting together everything the students had learned over the previous 3 weeks. Willow had brought an expanded selection of ingredients to encourage experimentation, including some unusual items like her house-made lavender bitters and smoked maple syrup. When Quentin arrived, she noticed he was dressed more casually than usual in a heather gray Henley that made his dark eyes even more striking. He greeted her with a warmth that hadn't been present in their early interactions. "I'm looking forward to creating something original today," he said as he arranged his station. "Though I'm not sure I can match the Portland Pioneer." "Don't set your expectations too high," Willow laughed. "That recipe took me 6 months to perfect. Today is about the process, not perfection." After giving the class an overview of how to approach original creation, starting with a base spirit, considering complementary flavors, and balancing the elements, Willow set them loose to experiment. As she circulated among the stations, offering guidance and suggestions, she found herself repeatedly drawn back to Quentin's workspace. He was methodically testing different combinations in small amounts, making notes about each variation. His approach was systematic yet creative, reminding her of how she developed new recipes for Whiskey Moon's seasonal menus. "How's it going?" she asked, observing his latest experiment, something with bourbon and what looked like her smoked maple syrup. "I think I'm getting closer," he replied, looking up with unexpected excitement in his eyes. "I'm trying to create something that captures the essence of a campfire in the mountain, smoky but sweet, with depth and warmth." "That's a beautiful concept," Willow said, genuinely impressed by his thoughtfulness. "May I?" She gestured to his latest attempt. He nodded, watching intently as she tasted it. The bourbon base was solid and the smoked maple added the right note, but it needed something else, something to lift and brighten the flavors. "It's good," she told him, "but it needs complexity. Think about adding a bitter element to balance the sweetness, maybe something with citrus notes." Quentin considered her suggestion, then reached for the orange bitters she'd provided. "Like this? Perfect choice," she smiled. "Just a few drops should do it." When she returned later, His creation had evolved into something remarkable: bourbon with smoked maple syrup, a touch of cherry liqueur, orange bitters, and a surprising addition of rosemary-infused simple syrup from their second class. He'd garnished it with a sprig of rosemary that he'd lightly charred with a match, releasing its aromatic oils. "This is exceptional," Willow said after tasting the final version. "You've really understood the fundamental principles of balance and creativity. What are you calling it?" Quentin considered for a moment. "Timber Summit," he decided. "It reminds me of evenings in the mountains." As the class wrapped up, Willow felt a twinge of sadness that the series was ending. She'd grown to look forward to these Saturday mornings, particularly the interactions with her most serious student. The upcoming retreat would provide one more opportunity to work together, but after that, there was no reason for their paths to cross again. While the other students were packing up, Quentin approached her demonstration table. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "These classes have been more valuable than I anticipated, both for the retreat planning and personally." "I'm glad," Willow replied, surprised by how much his words pleased her. "You were an excellent student." Quentin seemed on the verge of saying something else, but was interrupted by another student with a question. By the time Willow had finished answering, he had packed his things and was heading toward the door. She felt a sudden impulse to stop him, to suggest they meet again outside the context of classes or business consultations. But the professional boundary she'd maintained kept her silent as he left with nothing more than a wave and a "see you at the retreat." The 3 weeks between the final class and the Cascade Technologies retreat passed quickly for Willow. Spring had fully arrived in Portland, bringing with it increased business at Whiskey Moon and the rollout of their new seasonal menu. She'd incorporated elements from the classes into several new cocktails, including one inspired by Quentin's Timber Summit that she'd refined and added to the permanent offerings. She thought about him more often than she cared to admit, wondering what he would think of her variations on his creation, or finding herself mentally composing messages she never sent. She'd received one email from him confirming the final details of the retreat, but it had been purely professional, lacking the warmth of their conversation at the bar. The day of the retreat arrived with perfect weather, sunny but not too hot, ideal for the outdoor team building activities scheduled for the morning before Willow's Mixology workshop in the afternoon. She arrived at Mount Hood Lodge early to set up, admiring the stunning location with its panoramic views of the mountain and surrounding forest. The event space was impressive, a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows and multiple stations, already arranged according to her specifications. Willow and her 2 assistants from Whiskey Moon were setting up the ingredients when Quentin entered, deep in conversation with a woman Willow assumed was his assistant. He looked different in this setting, more formal in tailored slacks and a blue button-down, every inch the CEO as he discussed scheduling details. When he spotted Willow, however, his serious expression softened into a genuine smile. "Willow," he said, approaching her station. "Thank you for coming up early. Everything looks perfect." "The space is amazing," she replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at seeing him again. "Your team is going to have a great experience." "I hope so." He glanced at his watch. "They should be finishing the morning activities soon. Can I help with anything before they arrive?" "We're almost set, but thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I'm looking forward to seeing how everyone responds to the workshop." "So am I, especially after experiencing your teaching firsthand." There was something in his tone that made Willow wonder if he'd been thinking about her during their weeks apart, just as she'd been thinking of him. But before she could respond, the doors opened and employees began streaming in, laughing and talking animatedly from their morning activities. The workshop was a tremendous success. Willow had designed 5 stations, each featuring a different style of cocktail from refreshing Collins variations to complex stirred drinks. Teams rotated through the stations, learning techniques and creating their own versions with guidance from Willow and her assistants. Throughout the afternoon, she caught glimpses of Quentin moving among his employees, participating enthusiastically while also taking time to connect with each team. She was impressed by the easy rapport he maintained, firm but approachable, interested in everyone's contributions. This was a different side of him than she'd seen in class, where he'd been so focused on his own learning. The event culminated in a cocktail competition, with each department presenting their best creation to a panel of judges that included Quentin, Willow, and Cascade's CFO. The winning team, a cross-departmental group that had bonded over their shared love of citrus flavors, received gift certificates to Whiskey Moon, and the honor of having their creation featured on the bar's menu for a limited time. As the employees moved to the dining room for dinner, Quentin approached Willow as she supervised the cleanup. "That exceeded all my expectations," he said. "I've never seen the team so engaged and collaborative. Several people who normally never interact were exchanging contact information." Willow smiled, pleased by the success. "That's the magic of making something together. It breaks down barriers naturally." "Exactly." He hesitated, then continued more quietly, "I was wondering if you'd join us for dinner. The chef has prepared a special menu paired with local wines. As our expert consultant, you should experience the full retreat." The invitation surprised her. "Are you sure? I wasn't planning to stay." "I'm sure," Quentin replied with unexpected earnestness. "In fact, I'd been hoping to talk with you after the official events. There's something I wanted to discuss." Curiosity piqued, Willow accepted. "Let me just make sure my assistants are all set to take everything back to Portland." During dinner, Willow was seated next to Quentin at the head table. The conversation flowed easily, with other executives asking her questions about Whiskey Moon and her background in mixology. Quentin seemed pleased to see her integrating so well with his team, occasionally adding comments about what he'd learned in her classes. After dessert, as people began to mingle and some moved outside to enjoy the evening air on the terrace, Quentin turned to Willow. "Would you like to take a walk? The grounds here are beautiful, and there's a path around the lake that's lit at night." The invitation felt personal rather than professional, and Willow felt a moment of hesitation. But her curiosity about what he wanted to discuss, and if she was honest, her desire to spend more time with him won out. "I'd like that," she agreed. The evening air was crisp, but not cold as they walked along the lakeside path. The water reflected the lights from the lodge and the stars above, creating a peaceful atmosphere. They walked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Quentin spoke. "I wanted to thank you properly for everything you've done for this retreat," he began. "But also, I've been thinking about our conversations, not just about mixology or business, but the discussions we had at your bar that night." Willow's heart beat a little faster. "I've thought about those conversations too." Quentin stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression earnest in the soft lighting. "I don't usually mix business and personal matters. In fact, I've been so focused on building Cascade that I've neglected the personal entirely for the past few years. But meeting you has made me reconsider that approach." "What are you saying exactly?" Willow asked, wanting clarity despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I'm saying that I'd like to see you again, outside of a professional context. No classes, no business consultations. Just dinner, perhaps." His usual confidence seemed tempered with uncertainty, as if he wasn't sure of her response. Willow smiled, the tension she'd been carrying releasing. "I'd like that too. Actually, I've been wondering how to suggest something similar without seeming unprofessional." Relief and pleasure transformed Quentin's face. "So that's a yes to dinner." "It's a yes," she confirmed. "Though I should warn you, my schedule is complicated. Owning a bar means working when most people are enjoying their evenings out." "I'm sure we can figure something out," Quentin replied, his voice warm. "My schedule isn't exactly conventional either." They continued walking, their conversation shifting to more personal topics: favorite places in Portland, books they'd enjoyed, travel experiences. Willow found herself relaxing completely. The initial teacher-student dynamic fully dissolved into something more balanced and natural. When they eventually returned to the lodge, most of the retreat attendees had moved to the indoor bar area for nightcaps and continued socializing. Quentin checked his watch. "It's getting late. Are you driving back to Portland tonight?" Willow nodded. "That was the plan. My assistants have already left with all the equipment." "I'd feel better if you stayed," Quentin said, concern evident in his voice. "The mountain roads can be tricky at night. We have extra rooms reserved for the retreat." The offer was tempting, but Willow was scheduled to open Whiskey Moon the next morning. "I appreciate the thought, but I need to be at the bar early tomorrow." "At least let me follow you down the mountain to make sure you get to the highway safely," he suggested. "I need to return to Portland tonight as well for an early meeting." She agreed to the compromise, touched by his concern. As they parted in the lodge parking lot, Quentin hesitated, then took her hand briefly. "I'll call you tomorrow about dinner. Is Tuesday evening possible?" "Tuesday would be perfect," Willow replied. "I'm usually off on Tuesdays." The drive back to Portland was long but gave Willow time to process the unexpected turn of events. When she'd agreed to teach that first mixology class, she never imagined it might lead to a personal connection with someone like Quentin, someone whose intensity and passion for his work mirrored her own, despite their different fields. True to his word, Quentin called the next day to confirm their Tuesday dinner plans. He suggested Altura, a well-regarded restaurant known for its seasonal Northwestern cuisine and excellent wine list. "It's not too formal, but the food is exceptional," he explained. "And they have a surprisingly good cocktail program, though nothing as innovative as Whiskey Moon, of course." "Sounds perfect," Willow agreed, charmed by his consideration. "Should I meet you there?" "Actually, I'd like to pick you up if that's all right. Say 7 o'clock. The simple courtesy so often overlooked in modern dating touched Willow. "I'd like that. I'll text you my address." Tuesday arrived with Willow feeling an anticipation she hadn't experienced in years. Her last relationship had ended over a year ago, a casualty of her demanding schedule, and her ex's inability to understand her passion for Whiskey Moon. Dating as a bar owner was complicated. Most people didn't understand the late nights, weekend work, and constant creative energy the job required. But Quentin seemed different, someone who understood dedication to a vision because he lived it himself. The thought was both exciting and slightly intimidating. She chose her outfit carefully, a silk-wrapped dress in deep emerald that complemented her eyes, paired with simple gold jewelry. Professional but not severe, elegant but not overdone. She was applying a final touch of lipstick when her doorbell rang precisely at 7. Quentin stood at her door holding a small, beautifully wrapped package. He dressed in charcoal slacks and a crisp white shirt, no tie polished but relaxed. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Willow replied, feeling a flush of pleasure at his direct compliment. "You clean up pretty well yourself. Would you like to come in for a moment while I get my coat?" Her apartment reflected her personality: warm colors, comfortable furnishings, and an impressive collection of cocktail books and vintage barware displayed on open shelving. Quentin glanced around with evident interest. "Your home feels exactly as I would have imagined," he observed. "Welcoming but with attention to detail." "Is that a polite way of saying I'm predictable?" Willow teased, retrieving her coat from the closet. "Not at all," Quentin replied seriously. "It's a compliment on your consistency of character. What you create at Whiskey Moon and how you teach it all comes from the same authentic place." He handed her the package. "This is for you. Nothing elaborate, just something I thought you might appreciate." Intrigued, Willow unwrapped it to find an elegantly bound notebook with her name embossed on the cover. Inside, the pages were lined but also contained subtle grid patterns in the margins, perfect for notes and diagrams. "I noticed you sketching drink ideas during class breaks," Quentin explained. "Thought this might be useful for capturing your creations." The thoughtfulness of the gift, so perfectly aligned with her process, touched Willow deeply. "This is wonderful," she said. "Thank you for noticing that detail." "I notice a lot about you," he admitted quietly, their eyes meeting for a moment before he gestured toward the door. "Shall we? Our reservation is at 7:30. Altura was everything Quentin had promised: intimate without being stuffy, with a menu that showcased the best of Pacific Northwest ingredients. They were seated at a corner table with a view of both the open kitchen and the street outside, where early evening light still illuminated the city. Conversation flowed naturally as they explored the menu. Willow was amused to discover that, despite his serious demeanor, Quentin had a dry wit that emerged more frequently as he relaxed. She found herself laughing often as he recounted stories from Cascade's early days, including a pitch meeting where the power had gone out, forcing him to present by candlelight. "It actually worked in our favor," he recalled. "Nothing demonstrates the need for reliable, renewable energy quite like sitting in the dark." "That's called making lemonade from lemons," Willow smiled. "I've had similar moments at the bar, like when our ice machine broke during a heat wave last summer. We ended up creating a special menu of room temperature cocktails inspired by historical drinking traditions before refrigeration. Customers loved the creativity, and we averted disaster." "That's impressive quick thinking," Quentin said admiringly. "Most people would have just closed for the night." "Not an option when you have staff depending on their shifts and customers who have made plans," Willow shrugged. "Adaptation is essential in both our fields, I think." When their appetizers arrived, a delicate crab preparation for Willow and heirloom tomatoes, with house-made burrata for Quentin, they continued exploring parallels between their seemingly different worlds. "People are surprised when I tell them how much science is involved in mixology," Willow explained. "Understanding how different compounds interact, the effects of temperature and dilution, even the psychology of perception, it's all crucial to creating a great cocktail experience." "That makes perfect sense to me," Quentin nodded. "Innovation in any field requires both technical knowledge and creative application. At Cascade, our best advances have come from engineers who understand the science but can think beyond conventional applications." As dinner progressed to the main course, and they shared a bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir, Willow found herself increasingly drawn to Quentin's passion for his work. When he described Cascade's latest project, a solar technology specifically designed for the Pacific Northwest's often cloudy conditions, his eyes lit up with the same excitement she felt when perfecting a new cocktail recipe. "What made you decide to stay in Portland?" she asked. "Most renewable energy companies gravitate toward California or the Southwest. This is home," he replied simply. And there's something about the Northwest ethos that aligns with our mission: practical innovation, connection to nature, community focus. Plus, I wanted to prove that green technology can thrive even in places without constant sunshine. Willow smiled at his answer, recognizing a kindred spirit. That's essentially why I opened Whiskey Moon here instead of somewhere like New York or San Francisco. Portland appreciates craftsmanship and authenticity, but doesn't demand pretension with it. By the time dessert arrived, a shared plate of seasonal fruit tarts, Willow realized they'd been talking for nearly 3 hours without a single awkward pause or forced topic. Conversation with Quentin was effortless in a way she'd rarely experienced, flowing from professional interests to personal philosophies and back again. As they left the restaurant, the April evening had turned cool, and Quentin offered his jacket when he noticed Willow's slight shiver. The gentlemanly gesture reminded her of something her grandmother always said: "Watch how a man treats the small comforts, it shows how he'll handle the big discomforts." "Would you like to walk for a bit?" Quentin asked. "There's a nice path along the riverfront nearby." Willow agreed, and they strolled along the Willamette River, the city lights reflecting on the water. Their conversation continued, but with a new undercurrent of potential questions about favorite travel destinations, became hypothetical discussions of places they might go someday. Talk of upcoming seasons included tentative plans to experience them together. When they eventually returned to her apartment, Willow felt the pleasant tension of a successful first date coming to its conclusion. At her door, Quentin took her hand gently. "I've enjoyed this evening more than I can express," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I'd very much like to see you again." "I'd like that too," Willow replied, equally sincere. "Very much." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to set the pace, and kissed her with a tenderness that contrasted with his usually controlled demeanor. The kiss was brief but perfect, a promise rather than a demand. "Good night, Willow," he said softly. "I'll call you tomorrow." As she watched him leave, Willow realized she was smiling in a way she hadn't in a very long time, with genuine anticipation for what might develop between them. Over the next few months, Willow and Quentin's relationship blossomed with a natural rhythm that accommodated their busy lives. They discovered a shared love of early mornings, Quentin for running, Willow for experimenting with new recipes in the quiet before her staff arrived. This led to breakfast dates becoming their special tradition, meeting at small cafes around Portland before their workdays began. Quentin became a regular at Whiskey Moon on Monday evenings, sometimes bringing potential investors or clients, other times simply sitting at the corner of the bar with his laptop, content to work in Willow's orbit while she managed the night's operations. Her staff quickly grew fond of him, especially when they discovered his generosity with both compliments and tips. Willow, in turn, found herself fascinated by Cascade Technologies. Quentin gave her a tour of their facilities, proudly introducing her to his team and explaining their latest innovations. She was impressed by the respectful way his employees spoke to him, with admiration, but without fear, suggesting a leadership style that valued both excellence and humanity. Their different worlds complemented each other surprisingly well. When Willow mentioned struggling with a new inventory system, Quentin connected her with a software developer who specialized in small business solutions. When Quentin was working to reduce Cascade's carbon footprint further, Willow introduced him to local farmers and producers who supplied Whiskey Moon with sustainable ingredients. Summer arrived, bringing outdoor concerts and farmers markets that they explored together on Willow's rare weekend days off. They discovered a mutual love for hiking, spending Tuesdays, her regular day off, exploring trails around Mount Hood and the Columbia River Gorge. It was on one such hike in late August, standing on a vista overlooking a spectacular waterfall, that Quentin first told Willow he loved her. The words came not in a grand gesture but in a quiet moment of connection, as natural and unforced as everything else between them had been. "I love you, Willow," he said simply, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as they rested on a sun-warmed rock. "I wasn't looking for this when I signed up for that mixology class, but finding you has been the most unexpected and wonderful outcome of any decision I've ever made." Willow's heart filled with a happiness that seemed to expand beyond the boundaries of her body. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and inevitable. "And I'm very glad you decided to research team-building activities personally instead of delegating it." Their kiss against the backdrop of cascading water and ancient forest felt like a perfect distillation of what they'd created together, something natural yet extraordinary, powerful yet gentle. As autumn approached, bringing with it Whiskey Moon's busiest season and new challenges at Cascade Technologies, they continued to build their relationship around the edges of their demanding careers. They didn't always have conventional date nights or weekend getaways, but they created their own traditions: Sunday morning coffee and crosswords in bed, impromptu tastings when Willow was developing new cocktails, quiet dinners at Quentin's penthouse overlooking the city when they both needed to escape the world temporarily. In October, as Whiskey Moon celebrated its 5th anniversary with a special event that drew Portland's food and beverage community, Quentin watched proudly as Willow gave a speech thanking her team and customers. Seeing her in her element, confident, passionate, generous with credit to others, he felt a certainty about their future that he'd never experienced in previous relationships. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and the staff had completed cleanup, they sat together at the bar, sharing a bottle of champagne that had been a gift from a local restaurant owner. "5 years is impressive," Quentin said, raising his glass. "Here's to many more successful years for Whiskey Moon." "Thank you," Willow smiled, clinking her glass against his. "It's been quite a journey. Some days I still can't believe we made it this far." "I can," Quentin replied seriously. "You've created something special here, not just a successful business, but a place with heart and integrity. It reflects who you are." Willow's eyes softened at his words. "That might be the nicest compliment anyone has ever given me about this place. I mean it." He hesitated, then continued. "Speaking of the future, I've been thinking about us, about where we're headed." Willow's heart quickened. "Oh, these past months have been the happiest of my life," Quentin said, taking her hand across the bar. "Before I met you, I thought success meant achieving professional goals. You've shown me that real success includes making room for love and connection." "You've changed my perspective too," Willow admitted. "I was so focused on making Whiskey Moon work that I'd convinced myself a relationship would be too complicated. You've shown me it doesn't have to be a choice between passion for work and passion for someone." Quentin smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Exactly, which is why I've been wondering if you might consider moving in together. My place has that home office you could use for recipe development, and it's closer to the bar than your apartment. But I'm open to other options if you'd prefer." The offer wasn't entirely unexpected. They'd been spending most nights together anyway, but Willow appreciated that he'd framed it as a practical next step rather than a grand romantic gesture. It reflected their relationship perfectly: meaningful but not melodramatic, serious but not solemn. "I'd love that," she replied without hesitation. "Though I should warn you, my collection of cocktail books and vintage glassware takes up more space than you might expect." "I've already started clearing shelves," Quentin admitted with a grin. "And I was thinking we might convert part of the second bedroom into a proper home bar where you could experiment." The fact that he'd already considered how to make space for her passions in his home touched Willow deeply. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I try to be thorough," he replied with characteristic modesty. "It's a professional hazard." They sealed the decision with a kiss across the bar, the same bar where they'd first begun to see each other as more than teacher and student, more than business associates. The symmetry felt right, a perfect circle completing itself. By Christmas, they were fully settled into their shared life. Willow had indeed taken over part of the second bedroom for her mixology experiments. While her collection of cocktail books had found a home on custom shelves, Quentin had commissioned from a local woodworker as a moving-in gift. They hosted a holiday party for friends from both their World's Willow's bar staff and restaurant industry friends, mingling easily with Quentin's technology colleagues and business associates. The evening was a blend of their styles, Willow's warmth and creativity evident in the specialty cocktails and festive atmosphere, Quentin's attention to detail showing in the perfectly planned food and thoughtful party favors for each guest. As midnight approached and the last guests departed, they stood together at the penthouse windows, watching snow begin to fall over the city, a rare white Christmas for Portland. "This has been the best year of my life," Quentin said, wrapping his arms around Willow from behind as they gazed at the twinkling lights below. "Mine too," she agreed, leaning back against him. "Though I have a feeling next year might be even better." "I was hoping you might say that," Quentin replied, a note of anticipation in his voice, "because I have something to ask you." He turned her gently to face him, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Willow's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a ring, a stunning emerald surrounded by small diamonds, set in platinum. "I chose emerald because it reminds me of your eyes that first day of class," Quentin explained, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his expression. "The moment I saw them, something shifted in my world, though I didn't recognize it then." He took the ring from its box and held it between them, a question and an offer. "Willow Andersen, you've taught me more than how to mix a perfect cocktail. You've shown me how to blend passion and purpose, work and life, ambition and joy. I love you more than I thought possible, and I want to build a life with you, mixing all the parts of ourselves into something extraordinary. Will you marry me?" Tears of happiness filled Willow's eyes as she nodded emphatically. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "yes, nothing would make me happier." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the snow fell more heavily outside, coating the city in a pristine blanket of white, a fresh canvas for their future together. "Perfect fit," Quentin observed, his smile radiant. "Like us," Willow agreed, reaching up to kiss him as snowflakes danced in the darkness beyond their window. Their wedding the following spring was, like their relationship, a perfect blend of their personalities, elegant but not ostentatious, thoughtfully planned but with room for spontaneity. They held the ceremony at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley, with views of rolling hills and flowering orchards. Whiskey Moon closed for the day, the first time in its history, so Willow's entire staff could attend. Cascade Technologies employees were there as well, along with family and friends from both their lives. The celebration featured custom cocktails created by Willow for the occasion, including an updated version of Quentin's Timber Summit that they served for the toast. As they danced together as husband and wife, surrounded by people who had witnessed their journey from teacher and student to partners in every sense, Willow reflected on the unlikely path that had led them here: a CEO taking a mixology class, a bar owner teaching the fundamentals of her craft, neither expecting to find love in the process. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how sometimes the most beautiful creations come from unexpected combinations," Willow replied. "Like the best cocktails. Or the best partnerships," Quentin added, pulling her closer as they moved across the dance floor. "Exactly," she agreed, resting her head against his shoulder. "I'm so glad you mixed into my life." "Best decision I ever made," Quentin murmured into her hair, "signing up for that class." As the celebration continued around them, they remained in their own perfect moment, two people who had found in each other not just love, but a shared understanding of what it meant to pursue passion with integrity, to build something lasting, and to blend the elements of their lives into something greater than either could have created alone. 1 year later, they celebrated their anniversary by opening a second location of Whiskey Moon, this one with a dedicated teaching space where Willow could offer expanded mixology classes. The venture was a joint project, combining her creative vision with Quentin's business acumen. They named it Moon Cascade, a playful blend of their two worlds. The night before the grand opening, they stood together in the empty space, admiring how it had transformed from a vacant storefront to an elegant establishment that honored the original Whiskey Moon while creating something new. "What do you think?" Quentin asked, his arm around Willow's waist as they surveyed the gleaming bar and cozy classroom area. "It's perfect," she replied, leaning into him. "Everything we dreamed it could be." "Just like us," he said softly, placing a gentle hand on the slight curve of her stomach, their newest blend, expected to arrive in 6 months. Willow covered his hand with hers, smiling up at the man who had once been simply a serious student in her class. "Just like us," she agreed. "The most unexpected and wonderful creation of all." As they turned out the lights and locked up, preparing for tomorrow's celebration, both knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, mixing challenges and triumphs, work and family, passion and purpose into a life that, like the finest cocktail, was perfectly balanced yet always evolving, always surprising, and ultimately completely their own.